climate leadership engagement opportunities, and this is an opportunity to engage in a detailed, in-depth conversation about climate, not necessarily learning about the 6 types of greenhouse gases. Yeah. My name is Siegel. I'm happy to be here. The work that I do is bringing climate conversations to communities, whatever the community is, helping people understand the science, feel the urgency, and take action in whatever way suits for them. And that's exactly what each of us do when we are telling a story, whether it's through fiction or public speaking or even your conversations at the dinner table. When you are speaking or when you are writing, you're aiming to shape 1, 2, or 3 of these things. You're aiming to shape how people learn. You teach them something, what they learn about climate change in our conversation, how they feel about what they learn, and hopefully how they act on what they feel. So it's knowledge, emotions, action. I do that as a climate speaker specialist, so I train people on how to have conversations that engage and not enrage. No rotten tomatoes that get them thrown at me. Our writers have the same intention through their writing. And I have the joy of moderating a discussion with these incredible climate fiction authors. Each of them brings their own unique approach to this challenge. Some of our writers write to inform, some to move emotions, and some to ignite action, or maybe all 3. So we're going to dive in and explore how storytelling can change the way we see the world and our future. The way this is going to work, and we discussed this in our Zoom, we all like to talk. And we only have an hour, and we want you to have a chance to ask questions. So I am going to be a brutal timekeeper. Loy is going to be a brutal timekeeper. And the way we're going to work it is I'm introducing the speakers in order of presentation, and then I am sitting in the audience so I can make faces at you when you have 8 minutes. When you're at 8 minutes to stop. And of course, we're not going to be terribly rude, but we're doing this by agreement. So first to my left is Mallory O'Connor. She's an author of 10 books. She is an art historian and a musician. She's written nonfiction works such as Lost Cities of the Ancient Southeast and Flora's American Heritage River. This debut novel, American River Tributaries, is the first in a trilogy. She created a series of climate science fiction, which she will describe to you in this panel. O'Connor has taught art history at the University of Florida and Santa Fe College. She also served for a decade as director of the Thomas Center Gallery in Gainesville. And most recently, she created a new course for the CLEO Institute for Learning and Retirement called Using Art to Explore Climate Change. Bonnie Ogle is a retired public school teacher. She's now a docent at the Florida Museum of Natural History and an interpreter at the McGuire Center for Lepidoptera.
Good job.
Thank you. I've been practicing for an hour. A lifelong enthusiast, obviously, of butterflies and amphibians, she shares her passion through storytelling and education. She's secretary of the Sunshine State Book Festival and is a lifetime member of Girl Scouts USA, Bonnie, as am I, and Phi Kappa Phi, prestigious honor society that recognizes academic excellence. Her award-winning books, Tita Noboa, The Late Great Snake, and Miranda and the Golden Frogs, inspired children to be environmental stewards by identifying with her beloved sentinel species, the frogs. Pat Caren, who is here writing as Mary Q. Rogers on her name tag, is an award-winning author, former teacher, and former social worker. Her novels Trials by Fire and Season of the Dove earned literary acclaim. Her short works appear in various publications. She's a past president of the Writers Alliance of Gainesville. She's also a master gardener volunteer, blending storytelling and nature on her blog, marieqrogers.com, for those gardeners in here. The grisly prologue to her novel contrasts with her heartfelt dedication, which is to my great-grandchildren. May you grow up in a world that has no resemblance to the one in this story, Season of the Dove. Richard Gartee is an award-winning novelist, poet, author of 30 published books, spanning fiction, poetry, biography, history, and education. He has 8 novels, 6 poetry collections, and a biography, as well as seven college textbooks. He's a passionate storyteller, and he chronicled the history of the Hippodrome Theater. His novels, Atlantis Dying and Atlantis Obsession, weave climate change themes across time, blending history, science, and imagination to explore humanity's impact on the planet. I particularly enjoyed trying to learn a new language as he introduced Atlantis Dying. So without any further words from me, Mallory, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Ellen, for that introduction. Can everybody hear me all right? Yes. Okay, great. Well, I really want to start out by mentioning a few things about the topic of climate fiction, sort of generically known as cli-fi. So I will read you a few things about how that came into being and how it's being used by writers. First of all, a little bit more about me. When I was 10 years old, I asked Santa Claus for a special Christmas gift. I wanted a membership in the Sierra Club. Now, Santa must have mentioned this to my parents, because sure enough, there it was under the Christmas tree, a letter from the Sierra Club giving me a membership. I was absolutely delighted, and 72 years later, I'm still a member. So that's stuck. The beauty and the health of the environment have always been so important to me. Maybe it was a result of growing up in a small ranch in California's abundant Central Valley. Or maybe weekends camping in the Sierras, or riding my horse for miles along the American River, or tending the garden and feeding the chickens. Anyway, I've always been in love with nature. So, when I began writing a series of paranormal stories in 2016, I decided to incorporate climate fiction, aka cli-fi, into my stories. Writing about the climate is nothing new. Generations of writers have called upon descriptions of the climate to ground their stories in the real world and to add emotionally charged backdrops for their characters. In the 19th century, poets and novelists relied on rather florid descriptions of the climate to heighten the drama of their tales. Most people are familiar with the phrase, "It was a dark and stormy night." The archetypal example of florid melodramatic style of fiction writing, according to the modernists, however, honestly, I would read any story that started like that. But now the extreme weather swirls around the globe. Melting glaciers, burning forests, flooding homes, annihilating species. And the climate emergency has brought the unimaginable into our daily lives and into literature. And today's writers are beginning to document the issues and to propose possibilities for coping with the present and future problems initiated and accelerated by human activities. The result is a new literary genre dubbed cli-fi, stories about the results of climate change and its impact on groups and individuals, as well as the whole of the natural world. I first heard about cli-fi from a journalist named Dan Bloom, who is credited with inventing the term a while back. Bloom is a self-described, quote, climate activist of the literary kind, which I rather like. He said, "My most important work so far has been to help promote the new literary term cli-fi, and then to boost its popularity in the media as a headline term and an actual literary genre, differentiating it from sci-fi, which most everyone is familiar with. Generally speculative in nature, but inspired by climate science, works of climate fiction may take place in the world as we know it, in the near future, or in a fictional world experiencing climate change. Some of the typical elements of cli-fi writing include a crisis that results in a fearful and anxious mood and a plot that centers on the emotions of the characters. The genre as a whole focuses on the potential consequences of climate change and how the characters cope or fail to cope with the outcomes. Psychologists tell us that sci-fi stories can help build emotional resilience and help individuals connect emotionally with climate change. For each of my novels in my sci-fi series, I focused on a particular issue and explored it through my characters' experiences. In Epiphany's Gift, for example, I explored the consequences of fracking operations, the potential for pollution, groundwater contamination, and earthquakes. I've been extremely gratified when my readers have said, "I heard about fracking, but until I read your book, I really didn't know how dangerous it was." You bring it to life. You make them feel the danger. Your characters experience the danger. And the reader goes along and says, "God, I didn't know that." Yes. In my second book in the series, Key to Eternity, I explored species extinction and the loss of biodiversity. And in Xanadu's Cavern, book 3 of the series, I showed the consequences of large-scale real estate development in close proximity to Florida's fragile springs. My fourth book in the series, Fire Horse, which is set to be released in March, looks at the problem of drought and wildfires. So how did I get intrigued with paranormal phenomena and psychic practitioners and decide to incorporate that into my stories? Well, on May 23rd, 1979, I visited the spiritualist camp at Casadega, Florida for the first time. I don't know if you're familiar with Casadega, but it calls itself the psychic capital of the world. I wanted to find out something about some Native American artifacts that I had that nobody seemed to know much about. And a friend of mine suggested I pay a visit to a psychic archaeologist who lived and worked in Casadega. Skeptical but curious, I made an appointment and headed for the camp. Thus began a 40-year friendship with a psychic medium named the Reverend Diane Davis and an investigation of her world, and it has been a fascinating journey. For most people, and I'll just end by saying this, it's hard to imagine what the world will be like in a few decades. When the Earth's temperature continues to rise, what will happen to agriculture, to coastal communities, to the international order? Sci-fi imagines this new reality for us and offers a way to talk about the issues. In a review in the San Francisco Chronicle of Eden Lukaki's novel California, Sarah Stone wrote that if we survive, it will be in part because of books like this one, which go beyond abstract predictions and statistics to show the moment-by-moment reality of the price we may have to pay for our passionate devotion to all the wrong things. Calling all storytellers. Let's get to work.
I'm just going to stay here if that's okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, I'm an educator. I write for children. Kids can see the environment, but we need to help them do two things. First, we need to help them see it and get it. And secondly, we need to do it in a way that's not going to scare them. So, in Miranda and the Golden Frogs, which is bilingual, Miranda y las Ranas Doradas, for early readers, it tells the story of a child in Panama where the golden frogs are iconic. Instead of showing her a creek with a bunch of dead frogs or a creek with no frogs, her daddy takes her to a great big, what do you call it? I'm blanking here. You know, a big bin that they've turned into an ark. And scientists and volunteers are a shipping crate. Okay, scientists and volunteers are cleaning frogs of a fungus called chytrid. How many of you have heard of chytrid? The climate that's changing, that's becoming warmer and changing even daily, is increasing the spread of chytrid. So in this ark, they initially wanted to release the frogs into the wild, but there's no more safe habitat. And I know some of you are saying, well, it's not just climate change that's causing this, and that's true. There's habitat destruction, invasive species, ozone depletion. But climate change and all of the changes in our environment are causing pollution in our environment that the frogs notice before anyone else. They have porous skin, they soak in whatever's in their environment, and so they're called a sentinel species. If you forget everything else today, remember sentinel species. They're on the front line. They are the ones that experience any kind of pollution or change in the environment. Hundreds of species of frogs have gone extinct since the 1970s. So I wanted to talk for a minute about the same topic in this book, Freaky Frogs. It's for middle graders, and they have a little adventure with a biologist. It's a serious topic, climate change and what's happening in the environment. But this book is peppered with a lot of frog jokes, and it also has a UV wrap, which I'm sure no one wants to hear me do. I'll tell you some jokes if you like. But it also directs children that are reading into some things that kids can do. It directs them to AZA, the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, and they sponsor 2 wonderful programs for families, kids, adults. You, too, can become a frog watcher, which is one of their programs. You can do this right in your own backyard. And kids have been directed through this book into a program called Save the Frogs Day, which is happening worldwide in April. So if you're interested, just Google Save the Frogs Day. I want to jump from frogs to snakes. How many of you have met Titanoboa? No? Oh, yeah, you went to the Florida Museum.
Of course.
Well, Titanoboa lived about 5 million years after the demise of the dinosaurs, so it wasn't a meteor that ended Titanoboa's life. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He was found in a coal mine in Colombia. This coal mine is 15 miles around, so it's pretty deep, and the further down you go, the farther back in time you go. And there they have found fossils that are enormous, a 4-foot-long leaf fossil. So that shows that the climate in Titanoboa's time was considerably different than it is now. And you might say it was pretty tropical in Colombia, and that's true. But the few degrees difference between Titanoboa's time and our time has made a total difference in the climate. Very, extremely tropical. So we know what caused the demise of the dinosaurs, but we're not quite sure, but it's a pretty good clue from the size of the animals, the fossils that they're finding, that it had to do with climate. With mammals, the further south a mammal goes or to the warmer climate, they become smaller. But it's just the opposite with reptiles and amphibians. They become larger as it becomes warmer, as the climate warms. So I want to give you a little challenge. I want you to think about what I've told you about the climate in Titanoboa's time when Mr. Gartee tells you about Atlantis dying, and see if you see any connection. I'm going to stand up. Maybe I can talk louder that way.
Season of the Dove. When I started out writing this, I didn't have Cli-Fi in mind. I was just writing a book. Let me tell you a little about my background. I've been interested in nature and the environment since I was a kid. I mean, I grew up in the country, and my family appreciated natural things. When I was in high school at Ocala High School, that was when the cross-Florida barge canal was a big issue. And I remember being in one of my classes and talking against the barge canal, and a lot of my classmates were children of engineers and such, so I was kind of out there by myself. But I never lost my convictions. I am a master gardener. I'm also involved in garden clubs, which are we are very environmentally active. If you get a group of 10,000 people who can write the legislature, say, hey, we oppose this or we support this, they do listen sometimes. Anyway, Season of the Dove. This is won one award, and I was a finalist in another one, so I'm happy. It takes place 100 years in the future, the year 2123. At first, it was a story of these particular people, what they go through, as all stories are. But being in the future like that, well, what's the future going to be like? And so I was projecting things, of course, dystopian things like, you know, the world's fallen apart, the oligarchs run everything, the United States has been partitioned, Florida is its own area, and then you got the South, you got the West, you got all these parts of Florida. Texas was the first to secede, of course. You have a great disparity between rich and poor, like we're seeing today. But also, what kind of life were these people living? You know, what is the climate like? Not just the social and the economic stuff 100 years from now, which we hope doesn't turn out that way. But what would the climate be like? So I did a lot of research, looked at projections, sea level rise, temperatures and such. And there were some that were rather conservative projections, you know, very reasonable. And there were some that were a little bit off the chart, maybe, or close to it. And with the more dire projections. And what has impressed me since I started writing the book is that some of these things are actually coming true. And that's scary. I mean, this is only a few years, and I'm talking 100 years in the future. For one thing, if you look at Florida here, part of it's missing. This is all blue water now down there. No more Everglades. Not a happy thought. The St. John's River is no longer a river. It's a seawater channel. They call it the St. John's Channel. And you remember that? My granddaddy said that was once a river. Of course, it's affected a lot of species. I didn't get into frogs very much, but some wildlife. You've got wild hogs taking over the south, which they're doing anyway, and deer and other game animals that are declining, and nobody's quite sure why. So I had to incorporate these things in here. Now there are some good things. Solar panels. Every house, every building, every car even has a solar panel. Most things are run on solar. The country is off the grid. But it didn't happen soon enough. I mean, this happened 100 years in the future, but it didn't happen soon enough to really save us completely. You had other forces in here. At one point in the history of this future, you had a Department of Agriculture secretary who pushed for dividing up the big factory farms into small farms and organic gardening, organic farming. Of course, by this time, all these nice little policies are kind of falling by the wayside, and so that's another thing that's going on. Let's see, there's another point I was going to make. Oh, the hurricane. The story starts around the early part of May of that year, and there's this hurricane approaching, and it's the 6th hurricane of the season. 6th hurricane of the season in May. And it turns out to be a Category 6. And now, what are they talking about? They're talking about we need to expand these categories. 5 isn't enough. We may have to get a Category 6. I mean, this is entertainment in this story. There's a love story. There's a murder mystery aspect.
Politics.
Politics. One thing I hope that people get out of it, besides it being a pleasant read, I rewrite, and I don't get tired of the story, so it's got something going for it. But I think people can get into this and kind of think about the future and what do we want it to be like and what can we do to get here. So that's my hope.
Yeah.
I just stay in place? Y'all can hear me well enough?
Yes.
All right, the first novel I'm going to talk about is called Atlantis Dying. And I think everyone's heard of Atlantis, and maybe it's an old myth. Maybe it was a real place, maybe it wasn't. The fundamental beginning for me in conceiving of the book was I had seen a documentary about the Sahara Desert. And that they now know from taking core samples from off the coast of Africa and stuff, that the Sahara Desert, only about 5,500 years ago, was as wet as Florida. It was an absolute wetland. With all that went with that. There were channels, there was huge lakes, much larger than our Great Lakes, vast lakes. So there was also, I know you probably can't see that back there, but there was also, in the writings of Plato, he describes Atlantis, and he describes it in great detail. He says it's a true place. He says he heard this from his grandfather, who actually went to Egypt and was told about this by the Egyptians and shown hieroglyphs in the temples of what it was. And what they found is NASA took a photograph from outer space, just of all the planets like they do, and they found this land formation in the Sahara Desert over near Morocco, over near the coast. And it turns out that formation is almost exactly the same shape as Plato describes the city. It's got the same dimensions, it's got the same channels for the water that leads to the ocean. So after I saw that, I was thinking about it, and then the third part of it was that in this documentary, they said that what happened was that the Sahara Desert turned from this vast wetlands into what we see today in 100 years. Complete. Absolute. And today the Sahara Desert gets less than 2 centimeters of rain a year. So it's the driest place on earth. It's very dry. So I thought, okay, if Plato says Atlantis was a real place, and he says it looks like this, and they're saying, well, maybe this could be the site of Atlantis, which we're all running around looking for it in the Mediterranean, but they're saying, no, maybe it's over here on the coast. So I created a fictional story which was very much parallel to our political situation today, in which the scientists of Atlantis, through their study of astronomy, etc., they go to the king and they say, we know this is going to happen. You have only 100 years to evacuate the entire population of Atlantis, which according to Plato was like over 1 million people. So you only got 1 million people to evacuate, and you're back in the times when you don't have vehicles. You have boats and ships and stuff. So you've got to move 1 million people, and you only got 100 years to do it. And then it turns out that it really does turn into a desert, and has stayed to a desert. And it will, now we know, through our science today, now we know why it turned into a desert, and they have a good idea when it will turn back into a wetland. And that is simply that the Earth, at a certain point in the solar system's movement around its orbit, and the Earth's orbit around the sun, at a certain point, once every 20,000 years, there's a place where it changes the tilt of the Earth just by a few degrees, but it's enough that it forces the monsoon belt over Africa to move a little bit further south. So South Africa stays very wet, and the Sahara turns very dry, and it won't turn back wet again until then. My second book, called Atlantis Obsession, was set in the modern era, and what it was about was a UF graduate student who is actually chasing his girlfriend, and he's obsessed with Atlantis, and he goes off to, gets an opportunity to go to Africa to help communities drill wells in Africa for small communities, hand pumps. Turns out that under the Sahara Desert, even today, that there is, these vast lakes that were there have left a lot of groundwater. There's a tremendous amount of water under the Sahara, so the people are without water there, but it's only a few feet down. It's shallow enough that you could put a hand pump there, and the people in the small oasis communities could get their water. So he goes there to help them drill the water. While he's there are people who have the idea that they'll make great agricultural farms, and what they want to do is suck up all the water that's left in the ground to make these vast agricultural productions, which sounds like a good idea. Okay, we're going to feed all the people. But what happens is it's going to drain that water, the same thing that happened with the Ariel Sea in Uzbekistan. And since it's not going to rain there for another 10,000 years, that water's not going to come back. Do I have how many minutes?
You have 4.5.
So that's the story in my two books. This one is strictly about politics, how the king wants to do it, but all of the politicians in the legislature and all of the land barons who own all the land, they go, oh no, that's a hoax. We don't believe in that. We're not going to move the people. We don't want to lose that labor force. We got to keep them here. Now, one thing I had noticed is that in fiction and in nonfiction, since the time that Al Gore first came out with Inconvenient Truth, a lot of fiction writers, a lot of science fiction writers, write very dystopian because we have this view. You got to wake up the world. It's going to all end if you don't act quickly. But we've had that, and I think people have woke up to it. They may not have done what we want them to do, but they realize that there is something. What I notice is that when I try to take something away from you, you resist it. When I give you something, you accept it. So I have this idea, I don't know how it works out in literature, but I have this idea that there are just a couple simple things that we can do that put a more I don't know if they're simple, but they put a more positive spin on it. So I remember, and I think everybody in this room remembers, that not very long ago there was this 100-mile wide hole in the ozone layer that had been caused by the fluorocarbons. And within a short period of time, we stopped using fluorocarbons and the hole healed itself up. So one simple suggestion that we implement is that we say every new residential construction below the Mason-Dixon line, this falls in line with Pat's idea, every new residential construction, we create a building code and say every house that you're building has to have a solar roof on it. It has to be solar powered. The second thing is that we transform the automotive industry into pure electric cars all the time. And then people say, well, yeah, but what about the strain on the grid? Well, no, you plug your car into your solar-powered house, which is already producing more power than the house is using, and you charge your car for free. So what am I giving you? Well, how about if I take away your combustion engine, but I'm giving you freedom from OPEC? You're no longer at mercy to them, right? You know, what am I giving you if I have all new houses built with solar panels on the roof? No electric bill. Okay, so yes, there's a cost for you and I to go, there's a tremendous cost for you and I to go and get our house converted to solar. But you put that into new construction, it's buried in the mortgage. Hardly anybody would even notice a change in their mortgage payment. It would be the same, very near it. Hardly any change at all. And what would be the advantage to the real estate developer and to the salesperson and the real estate person? Oh, buy this house, you won't have the electric bills.
Right.
Right. So it's like, could these things be done? Yes, they could be done. And if they were done, we might have the same net effect that we had with the ozone hole. That it might, more quickly than we predict, it might change it. And as Ellen said in one of her things that she sent to me, she said, we can do this. We can do it together. And that's kind of my feelings about that.
Please run for president.
Thank you. What a variety, and what a variety of approaches. Opening for questions.
I have a question for Richard. Would you consider the solar roof, not tiles, but the solar roof shingles that are currently available?
The question is, would we consider solar roof shingles that are available?
Right.
I don't know which it will be. I do know that here's what happens is, like right now, somebody says, well, the problem with electric cars, we don't know how to recycle the batteries.
Right.
As soon as every car is electric, it evolves naturally that there is an industry that says, oh, we want to take used batteries and recycle it. So I think the same thing happens with the solar. As soon as you have a building code And just not all houses in America, it just has to be everything below the Mason-Dixon line. So everything in this area that's the Sun Belt, that gets a tremendous amount of sun, we'll be able to take advantage of. Which technology will win out in that? Obviously, people will develop more things. One thing about this nation you can be sure of is if there's a market, then there's a whole bunch of people who want to try and develop and take a piece of that market. So I think that's the way it works out. Certainly the shingles, because they look pretty, and they don't look like these big glass things sitting on your roof, probably are the way that a lot of people favor it.
They are available now.
Yeah.
And I would like to point out that what you are saying is already available if you look up Vox, V-O-X, Dave Roberts, it was a pre-election video.
Yeah.
We absolutely have the technology to produce. We have the financing and the technology to recall everybody's internal combustion engine. Sorry, going into my climate speaker thing here, but it's very good information to have. Okay? We have the technology, we have the financing to trade your internal combustion car into an electric vehicle. It takes the kind of effort we did in World War II, just retool industry to do that, and within 5 years we could all have electric vehicles. We have the Inflation Reduction Act for the moment, which will give low and moderate income people a little extra boost if they want to go electric or solar. It gives middle class and upper middle class people some break on your taxes. So we do have some financing for exactly what you're talking about, solar rooftops and electric vehicles. It exists. It's not in the future. That's
Right.